Mali's prime minister recently said he has evidence that France has been training terrorist groups operating in the West African country. The people of Mali have held several protests recently, saying enough is enough and demanding the withdrawal of French forces in the country. One of the demonstrators says here the situation in Mali has worsened due to the presence of French troops.
Fransiani Fransi bora onga jamana kono bi Mali kono bi akadne inafo kore Fransi ka boya bi akadi awnye ni Fransi aga minacha bi akadi awnye ko jo kadaga unana kanga ngala kana dumo anga kode jena manye.
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Africa Today, which is focusing on the statement by Mali's prime minister to the effect that France is supporting terrorists in this West African country. The second segment of our program is focusing on how Canadian companies are plundering Africa's minerals. So stay tuned till the end of our show and please keep your comments coming.
France training terrorists in Mali. France's relations with its former colony Mali has deteriorated since a coup in August 2020 toppled President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Mali's Prime Minister Choguel Kokala Maiga has told the Russian media he has evidence that France has been training terrorist groups operating in the West African country. Maiga said French troops had created an enclave in Kidal, a town in the desert region of northern Mali, and handed it over to a terrorist group known as Ansar ad-Din, allegedly linked to Al-Qaeda. He said the Malian military was blocked by French forces from entering the territory.
Addressing the 76th session of the UN General Assembly this year, Malian Prime Minister further accused France of failing to consult his country before withdrawing from a regional force that was combating terrorism.
Mali regrets the fact that the principle of consultation, which should be the rule between privileged partners, was not observed before the decision by the French government. The new situation resulting from the end of Operation Barkhane puts Mali before a fait accompli, abandoning us mid-fight to a certain extent, and it leads us to explore pathways and means to better ensure our security autonomously or with other partners.
Well, to discuss Mali's assertion that France is supporting terrorist groups in this West African country, my colleague earlier contacted Daniel Lazar, a journalist and author. Now, we first asked Mr. Lazar if he is surprised that Mali is accusing France of supporting terrorist groups in the country. And this is what he had to say.
Not entirely. France, the trouble is that Mali is disintegrating. All kinds of conflicts are breaking out. And the French find themselves taking sides in various inter-ethnic conflicts, such as in support of the Tuaregs, for example. The Tuaregs have close relations, allegedly have close relations to Al-Qaeda. So it's very messy, and the French find themselves in alliances with forces they'd rather not be aligned with. So this is these kinds of confusions or difficulties often break out in these kinds of conflicts.
In June, France decided to scale back its Sahel deployment considerably following a military takeover in Mali in August 2020. Mali's prime minister stated that the government has no access to Kidal, the enclave controlled by France. He told Russia's RIA Novosti news agency that there are armed groups trained by French officers in the region. Why is France facing accusations of supporting the terrorists in Mali's Kidal region?
France has tried to form local alliances in order to facilitate its military effort. And when you form local alliances with local fighting groups, you often find yourself drawn into very complicated local wars. And then you find yourself on the side of people who you would rather not be on the side of. France is in a no-win situation. The situation in Mali is disintegrating rapidly. All kinds of ethnic conflicts are breaking out. France's presence can only make matters worse. It will not improve things. The fighting is spreading, the instability is spreading, and the French presence at this point is really more of an irritant than any kind of calming influence.
There have been reports that Mali plans to hire private security contractors from Russia to boost its own forces. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has dismissed accusations of Russian government involvement, saying that Kremlin had nothing to do with the deal, which was negotiated between Mali's government and a private military contractor.
Mali has approached Russian private military companies. We have nothing to do with that. This is an activity that has been carried out legitimately.
Mali, meanwhile, has received 4 helicopters, weapons and ammunition from Russia. Interim Defense Minister Sadio Kamara had acquired the aircraft in a contract agreed in December 2020 to support his armed forces in their battle against terrorists. Kamara said Russia is a reliable partner.
The extreme speed of execution of this contract shows the reliability and seriousness of this partner.
However, France and other European countries have been pressurizing Mali to halt its military ties with Russia. Mali is a sovereign country, so why do France and other European countries still behave like colonial powers and now demand that this country stop military cooperation with Russia?
Well, France is in no position to demand that Mali do anything, but France certainly has its troops there. It can withdraw its troops if it wants to, and can express unhappiness with any policy by the Mali government. So therefore, certainly, but for France shouldn't go beyond that without affronting Mali's sovereignty. But as I said before, the situation in Mali is very unsettled, very unstable. Charges are being lodged, by all parties. Things are breaking down, and the French presence is only making matters worse. And whatever France, whatever France does at this point is going to cause greater and greater offense with the Malian government. So it's a bad situation for all concerned.
Now, early October, Mali summoned France's ambassador to register its indignation at French President Emmanuel Macron's criticism of the country's army-dominated government.
The French army should not fill the void of the non-functioning of the Malian state. That must be restored.
Now, the rising France-Mali tensions have raised questions over whether Paris is losing its grip on its former colony. We asked Mr. Lazare his opinion on the reported decline of France's influence in Mali.
I think we can say that, yes, that's quite true. First of all, the situation there is deteriorating. As I said before, France's presence is only making matters worse. France has less and less leverage, and it's unable to really shape events in that part of the world to its liking. And the longer it stays there, the worse things seem to. The fighting is spreading, the civil war is widening, and things are going downhill. So they're worse now than they were back in 2013 when France decided to insert itself into this conflict. But yes, its influence is definitely declining. But that's true for the U.S. influence in much of the world as well.
The UN Secretary-General's Special Representative for West Africa and the Sahel told the Security Council in January this year that insecurity across the region had expanded into areas previously considered safe, with militants and terrorists continuing to stage deadly attacks.
Now, France and other Western countries have over the years claimed to be fighting terrorism in African countries such as Mali, but terrorist attacks are on the increase. So what are these Western powers really doing on the ground in Africa?
Clearly, U.S. and French policies are actually making the problem worse and causing it to spread farther and farther. And the fact that the U.S. military has a presence in, I think, 53 of 55 countries, is outrageous. The U.S. has no idea what it's doing. It's inserting itself in areas about which it's completely ignorant, and the only result can be to aggravate local conflicts. That is quite true. And wherever the U.S. goes, military conflict goes, and military quagmires arise. It's a case of these empires just flailing about aimlessly and making conditions worse by their very presence. And in the case of Mali, I mean, the original sin was the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, and the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, and the fact that Libya then subsided into anarchy meant that arms were liberated from the government. They spread across the country. They were sold internationally, and huge amounts of arms made their way to the south, to countries like Mali. And they had a huge destabilizing impact. So wherever the U.S. or the Western powers intervene, the result is to create more disorder rather than less. And the upshot is widening conflict, more deaths, more destruction, and more anarchy. So that's the situation that France finds itself in.
Mr. Lazar there says that foreign military presence has worsened the situation in African countries. Of course, amid the mess, these Western powers are looting the continent's resources. Well, that's our next topic. After a short break, we shall see how Canadian multinationals are looting mineral resources in Africa. Stay with us.
Canada stealing Africa's minerals.
The Canadian mining industry is a global giant. Around 75% of mining companies are based in Canada. Now, currently, Canada-based companies own majority shares in two of the three largest gold mines in the African continent, the Loulo-Gounkoto mine in Mali and Kibali in the Democratic Republic of Congo are owned almost entirely by Canada's Barrick Gold Corporation. The majority of internationally listed mining companies are also headquartered in Canada, and these companies have operations in almost every African country.
These companies have largely been responsible for dispossessing farmers, displacing communities, employing forced labor, devastating ecosystems, and sparing human rights violations. And in addition to this, these companies are infamous for evading taxes. In 2019, minutes before Barrick Gold's annual general meeting, a spontaneous flash mob emerged to protest over violations by this Canadian mining giant in the Dominican Republic, Papua New Guinea, and Tanzania.
In almost every country in the world, here people do not have access. Here people do not have access to clean water. To clean water. Barrick mine sites. Barrick mine sites. In PNG and Tanzania. In PNG and Tanzania. Are militarized sites. Are militarized sites. Where locals are killed and raped. By mining security. By mining security. These victims have no access. Have no access. Even though these abuses are well documented by Amnesty International.
Now, to discuss more about the negative impact of Canadian mining companies in Africa, we have contacted Edward Corrigan, an international human rights lawyer. Now, we first wanted to know why many internationally listed mining companies looting African resources are headquartered in Canada.
About 75% of the world's mining companies are actually headquartered in Canada. Canada has a very strong mining sector, and also has a lot of resources to be extracted: gold, even diamonds, oil, and many other things, copper, nickel. So it's in a very, very strong position to develop the expertise and has the resources to expand out in the world, particularly to Africa, but also to Latin America.
Africa's mineral resources, which are public resources for everyone's benefit, are being privatized by Canadian mining multinationals. Canada is actually looting the African continent and destroying the environment while hoodwinking the public that these are genuine investment moves. A Tanzanian villager says mining by Barrick has destroyed lives.
Naitwa Paulo Baita, nasoma katika shule ya msingi Kirege na umri wa miaka 10. Nilienda kuoga mto Mara. Nilipooga nikapata ugonjwa.
Lakini tulijali kama ni Tanzania. Sasa ndipo kulingana tulivyotafiti ikaonekana kwamba sana sana aliathirika baada ya kuwa ametembelea eneo moja linaloitwa Mpitigite.
Ng'ombe wamekufa. Sasa sisi tuna hali mbaya sana kulingana na huu mgodi unatuathiri. Umeturudisha nyumba katika maendeleo tuliyokuwa nayo. Yaani kwa mfano mimi nilikuwa na ng'ombe 55. Wamekufa, wamebakia ng'ombe wangapi? 5.
How are Canadian mining companies involved in looting African mineral resources?
The way the economy is structured, and particularly for shareholders, and it's sort of a, all economic systems have strengths and weaknesses, but the weaknesses in the capitalist system, and particularly the stock market, is that the people want to get maximum return on their investment, but they're not directly connected to the results of their investment or the actions of the company. So the shareholders want maximum return. Therefore, the people that they hire and put in charge of these companies want to keep their jobs, and they want to make as much money as possible. So they're ruthless and make deals and don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to cover the external costs, for example, damage to the environment, damage to human rights, damage to, agricultural sector. So by externalizing the costs, they make a lot more money. But of course, the costs are still there and should be calculated as part of the overall operation. But in most third world countries, they're ignored. They're just dumped on the people. And you have corrupt elites, in the military or the government or private sector that are quite willing to sell out their own country and trample on the rights of indigenous people or other poor people in the countries and take the money for themselves.
The Canadian government abets this exploitation by encouraging investment development efforts in Africa through initiatives such as the Canadian Investment Fund for Africa, which preaches privatization of businesses and other services, industrial development, and mineral prospection and exploration. Is the Canadian government complicit in the looting of African minerals by mining companies based in the country?
Well, unfortunately, the Canadian government is complicit in that they, directly represent, and external affairs tries to promote these mining industries in the third world because the companies are based in Canada. They pay taxes there. They lobby the Canadian government. They are in a position to exert power on the Canadian government and affect democratic elections in Canada. But those same things don't apply in third world countries. So you have the Canadian government, intervening on behalf of these mining corporations to, for example, stop Mexico from taxing their mining operations. Same thing in Africa, where you have, actually horrific instances, assassination of political leaders, assassination of indigenous leaders, attacks on people who are trying to protect the environment. And because of the political system in Canada, the corporations pay money to the Canadian government, and then they want the representation. So the Canadian government, which supposedly has a good reputation, then intercedes and puts pressure on the governments to bow to the corporations that are based in Canada.
Canada's resolve to continue control of Africa's mining sector was a major objective of the recent Canada-Africa Chamber of Business, which was addressed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The conference was attended by major Canadian companies involved in Africa's lucrative mining sector. Now, how have African leaders abated the wanton looting of the continent's resources by Canadian companies?
In a word, corruption. The most countries in Africa and even Latin America and South America, you've got very corrupt elites. You've got very strong presence of military. You've got dictatorships. And these individuals will take money for themselves, sell out their communities, and sell out their own countries and make themselves rich. But the money, again, doesn't go to the country. Most of the time it goes up to, to some sort of tax shelter or hidden away in Switzerland or some other country that has tight banking rules that allows people to hide their wealth. So you have people with, a job that only pays maybe $5,000 or $10,000 a year, but they end up being, multimillionaires because of the corruption and the payments they get and how they use the police and death squads and private militias to suppress people who are directly affected.
Canada's premium nickel resources is set to buy Botswana's defunct state-owned BCL copper mine with a view to restarting operations within 3 years. This is yet another example of how Canadian multinationals are conspiring to take over major African mining operations to the detriment of the continent. While these Western multinationals take away gold in Africa, locals, including children desperate to survive, are forced to engage in primitive mining, which is risky for their lives. A Tanzanian kid explains here of the dangers he faced while mining.
Usiku moja nilivyoenda nikiwa na chimba, mwenzangu alisema toka haraka duarani humo. Mimi ngasema ngoja basi nimalizie mara moja. Nilivyokuwa nataka kutoka ndo likanibomokea game. Nikapoteza fahamu. Nilipopoteza fahamu, wakaja kuja kunitoa, walivyonitoa wakanipeleka Chunya. Walivyonipeleka Chunya, nilala mpaka saa 10.
Now, the issue of the looting of African resources by Western countries is a never-ending challenge. So what needs to be done to end this looting?
Well, it's a very good question. There needs to be, I think, some international laws setting, minimum levels of taxation. You need to strengthen the United Nations. You need to strengthen, the international court system and justice system, and allow people to sue companies in Canada or the United States or wherever they're based, which would at least, I think, one way to solve the problem. But the companies need to realize that by exploiting these countries and resources in a very, very detrimental way to the local people, in the long term, it's not in their interest, because eventually there'll be some pushback and problems. And in my opinion, it's much better if the companies work in a positive way so that the countries who have the resources get the benefit of the resources.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Corrigan, for your insight. Here at Africa Today, we shall continue exposing the continued looting of Africa's resources by Western multinationals. Well, that's it for this week's edition of Africa Today. Send us your views and comments through our social media handle. You can also watch today's episode by visiting our website, presstv.ir. From me, Mubarak Kenya, it's goodbye for now.